It wasn't the insult that broke me, it was the silence. I stood in the courthouse hallway wearing the one thing they never dared to mention, my dress blues, perfectly pressed, creased with the kind of respect they refused to give me. My ribbon sat flat against my chest. Bronze star, Navy commendation, and a pin from a covert operation they would never even be cleared to know about. But when my name echoed from the speaker above the courtroom doors, it sounded small, smaller than it should have, like it didn't belong there. My boots made no sound on the polished tile, but every step felt like a gunshot. They were already inside. My mother and father, seated like royalty. My mother's fingers wrapped tight around the handle of her designer purse, knuckles pale as bone. My father had that folded arm stillness he used to wield like a sword. The lawyer beside them whispered something, and they didn't even look toward the door. Because they didn't expect me to show up. They thought I'd fold. I was deployed overseas when the letters started: legal threats, asset division, absurd claims about debts and inheritance I never took. My name was included only in the context of removal. They'd summon me to court like a stranger, suing their own daughter, pretending I didn't exist in the family trust, the property ledger, the bloodline. But I showed up. And I brought one document. You ever realize how betrayal doesn't feel like a stab, but more like suffocation? Not one dramatic wound, just the slow press of hands around your throat over years, until breathing becomes effort. I sat on the opposite side of the room, alone, no lawyer, just the folder I carried in one gloved hand. The judge, an older woman with silver hair clipped back in a no-nonsense twist, glanced between us. She asked if I had representation. I said I speak for myself. Your Honor, I've done it most of my life. My father exhaled, that loud, disappointed breath I used to shrink under. But not today. They opened with the usual claims that I had distanced myself from the family, failed to contribute, never showed gratitude for the opportunities given, as if silence from war zones counts as ingratitude, as if medals pinned by generals somehow meant I had abandoned my mother's dinners or ignored my sister's baby showers, as if all that mattered was their script, and I'd ruined the play. Do you know what it's like to serve a country that salutes you, and come home to parents who pretend you're dishonorably discharged from their love? I sat still, calm, a storm held in a spine. Then the judge turned to me. Miss Ellery, you have the right to respond. I opened the folder. Inside was one page, not a legal rebuttal, not a financial statement. A copy of a field commendation classified, but cleared for court disclosure. It bore the signature of a 4-star general. It also bore the names of 2 men. One of them was my father. Because years ago, in a hidden corner of the world, I intercepted communications on a compromised U.S. engineering project. Civilian contractors were bribed to leak designs to foreign buyers, including one project linked to my father's firm. He didn't know I was the intel analyst assigned to investigate. He didn't know the military traced bank wires and messages straight to his senior VP, his best friend, his weekly golf partner. The document didn't accuse, it didn't even name him directly. It simply showed that I'd saved his reputation, silently, anonymously, without ever demanding his thanks. But today, I wasn't silent. This document, I said, holding it steady in gloved fingers, is the only reason your company wasn't audited by federal defense agencies. I buried this. For your sake. My mother went pale. My father blinked. The courtroom did not make a sound. You sued me, I continued, voice low, after I protected you. Not just as a daughter, but as a soldier. The judge leaned forward. This is a serious allegation. I shook my head. It's not an allegation. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm just reminding them. I exist. You know that moment. When a truth is too big for a room. That's what silence feels like when it's no longer yours to carry. The judge requested a recess. My parents' lawyer asked to approach. Whispers buzzed like flies near a corpse. but I stayed seated. Still. Then the bailiff handed the judge a note. A federal flag insignia in the corner. Homeland Security stamp. She read it. Slowly. Then her eyes lifted toward me, not with pity, with recognition. "Miss Ellery," she said, "we've just received notice that 2 federal officers are en route. Would you remain for further testimony?" I nodded once. That was the moment. The moment my mother's hand finally let go of her purse. The moment my father shifted, as if seeing me not the little girl who used to salute him in the driveway, but the woman who'd quietly outranked his pride. And still, I said nothing. I didn't gloat. I didn't look back. Because power, true power, doesn't announce itself. It walks in wearing its own name. The hallway outside the courtroom was colder now. Not by temperature, but by tone. The kind of cold that seeps into your shoulders when you know everyone suddenly sees you differently. Not as a name on a lawsuit, not as an estranged daughter, but as someone who had let silence protect those who would have let her burn. I didn't sit this time. I stood, upright, arms behind my back, posture firm not out of defiance, but out of discipline. The uniform made it natural. The door opened behind me. My mother stepped out first. Her heels clicked unevenly on the tile, like her balance was off, like everything that held her together appearances. Control, plausible deniability had started to slip. She didn't look at me. Not at first. She just stood to the side, as if waiting for someone to walk her to her car. Then she said it. I didn't know. 3 words, as if unknowing was innocent. I didn't respond. Because what does it mean to not know your own daughter? Her rank, her work, her silence. What does it mean to raise someone and not realize she's built an entire world without you? She looked at me finally. Her eyes not teary, not regretful, just unsure, like she was trying to see someone familiar in a face that had outgrown her story. "You could have said something," she whispered. I looked at her. "You could have asked." Behind her, my father came out next. Slower. He was on his phone, like always. Except this time his hand wasn't steady. He saw me, hesitated, then turned away. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. He was the one retreating now. Have you ever watched someone try to climb back into their authority and realize it's already gone? 2 federal agents arrived within the hour. One was from Homeland, the other from an internal affairs branch I used to brief back in Langley. They didn't shake my hand. They saluted, in front of my parents, in front of the court clerk, in front of everyone. No words, just the gesture. And that was enough. You ever see your father lower his eyes during a salute meant for his daughter? The judge resumed the hearing, but the power in the room had shifted. The lawyer tried to spin their case again, this time laced with a little more sugar, a little less venom. But it was too late. The truth had already breached containment. I was asked if I wished to proceed with a countersuit. I declined, because this was never about money. It was about acknowledgement, recognition, visibility. Do you know how many women in defense go unnoticed because they wear silence like armor? Do you know how many daughters get stripped from family portraits just because they chose honor over obedience? I gave the judge one more document, my discharge form, honorable, recent, and sealed with commendation, the ink still fresh from the Department of the Navy. She read it slowly, then placed it face up for the court to see. "Let the record reflect," she said, "that Lieutenant Commander Ellery has met and exceeded her duty to this country, and to the truth." A silence followed. But this time, it was not suffocating. It was respect. When the session ended, I walked out alone, but not small, not erased. And as I crossed the courthouse steps, I saw something I'll never forget. My brother, leaning against the side of his car. I hadn't known he was there. He hadn't spoken to me in nearly 4 years, not since our last Christmas. When I refused to give a speech, he wrote about family values for a local fundraiser. He watched me for a long moment. I expected mockery, indifference, a smirk, but all he said was, I didn't think you'd come. I did. And you wore the uniform. Yes, I said. It was time. He nodded once. Slow. I saw what the judge said. The agents. That was real. It was always real. He didn't argue. He just looked down, then up again. And this time, his eyes didn't hold superiority. They held something heavier, shame. I told Dad to go through with it. He admitted, said you'd never show, that you didn't care. I didn't flinch, because some confessions come too late to matter. Some wounds are not meant to be healed, just carried with clarity. Why didn't you fight harder? He asked. Quieter. Back then, when they started icing you out. I turned to him, not angry, just calm, because I had other battles. You ever try to explain to someone that survival itself is a full-time war? That being silent isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the only form of command you have left. He didn't say more, and I didn't need him to. Because finally, he wasn't talking over me. He was listening. I got in my car. The folder still sat beside me, closed. Not as a weapon, but as proof. Proof that I never had to raise my voice to reclaim my place. Proof that some uniforms don't need applause, just presence. As I pulled out of the lot, the sun caught the mirror just right. I saw myself. Not the erased daughter, not the courtroom ghost, but the soldier who had finally stopped asking to be seen. The first stop wasn't home. It wasn't a base. It wasn't even anywhere with a flag. It was a small cemetery outside town. Flat stones, quiet trees. The kind of place no one visits unless they remember. I parked beside the gravel path and walked with my gloves still on. Not out of formality, out of respect. I hadn't been here since the funeral. My grandfather's. He was the only one who had ever called me lieutenant before anyone else did. Long before the rank. Long before the wars. Before I even believed I belonged in the academy. I'd sat with him on that same porch, years ago, tracing the curve of his medals while he polished them with a hand that still trembled from Korea. They'll never give you permission, he said once, so don't wait for it. I remembered that now. As I stood before the etched stone, I didn't speak aloud. I didn't cry. I just stood. You ever talk to someone without words? Ever feel their pride in the back of your throat like you can almost taste it? He was the reason I walked into war with steady hands. And the reason I walked out of that courtroom with something stronger than victory, dignity. Behind me, the wind shifted rustling leaves, lifting a corner of my coat. I reached into the inner pocket and pulled out one thing I'd carried through every deployment, every transfer, every moment I needed reminding. A photo. Me, in basic. Him, standing beside me. His cane grounded like a rifle. His hand on my shoulder like it weighed nothing and everything at once. I tucked it under the edge of the headstone, then turned back toward the road, because there was still something left to do. That night, I walked into my childhood home without knocking. The key still worked. No one changed the locks, they never expected me to return, but the air inside had changed. Or maybe I had. The pictures on the wall were still there. Family vacations, graduations, birthdays, but in all of them I was missing. Cropping me out had become its own tradition, frame by frame, year by year. You ever feel your absence hanging on a wall? My mother was in the kitchen. She didn't flinch, just kept stirring something on the stove. I didn't speak, not yet. She poured the soup into 2 bowls, placed one at the table, sat. Your father's not here, she said. He went to stay with Mark. I nodded. He didn't want to see you. I noticed. We sat in the quiet, steam rising between us. Then she asked it. Why the courtroom? Why the lawsuit? I replied. No, why show up? Why not let it go? I leaned forward. Because the only thing worse than being erased is letting them think they succeeded. She winced. And I felt it, not pity, not rage, just that sharp, still ache of being misunderstood by the person who shaped your first words, your first memories, your first fears. I didn't know what you were doing, she said. You were always gone. You never called. I couldn't. You didn't try. I closed my eyes. Mom, I whispered, do you have any idea what it feels like to protect people who think you're abandoning them? She looked away. I reached into the same folder, slid another paper across the table. Not a threat. Not proof. A letter. Handwritten, from my commanding officer. Read it, I said. She did. Her hands trembled by the third paragraph. She stopped twice. By the time she finished, her knuckles were white again. But this time, not from pride. From something else. Shame maybe. Or realization. He said you saved 30 lives. No, I corrected gently. I just kept a pattern from repeating. That's all any of us do. We sat in silence again. Then she did something I didn't expect. She reached into the drawer, pulled out a photo album I hadn't seen in years, opened to a page I thought was long gone. Me in fatigues, standing beside a helicopter, helmet in hand, eyes half closed from wind and exhaustion. A snapshot someone had taken on the edge of deployment. I kept this, she said. Then why wasn't it on the wall? She didn't answer. Because what do you say when you've deleted your daughter out of habit? Instead, she turned the album, placed it in front of me, as if to say, start again. But I didn't flip the page, because I didn't come for nostalgia. I came for closure. I stood, took the album with me, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even in a home that chose to forget me, I was never truly gone. The door closed behind me with a soft click. You ever leave your own home and feel lighter? Because the weight wasn't yours anymore. Outside, the air had cooled. The wind smelled like distance. I walked toward my car with the album pressed to my chest. Not for warmth. For proof that I could walk back into silence and leave it undisturbed. Because I didn't need to be heard anymore. I just needed to be seen. 2 weeks later, the medal arrived. Not by ceremony. Not by parade. Just a quiet delivery from an unmarked government envelope, as if valor could be folded and mailed. I opened it on the porch. Alone. No cameras. No press. No family. It was the Distinguished Service Cross. Not the highest. But enough to silence a lifetime of being underestimated. I held it between my fingers. Heavy. Cold. Real. There were no tears. No speech. Just a long, deliberate inhale. You ever hold something in your hands that proves everything they refuse to believe? And yet even then, it wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving I was never broken to begin with. Later that day, I got a call. Blocked number, no caller ID. But I knew the voice instantly. My father. Not warm, not angry, just tired. Your mother told me, he said, about the letter. The agents. I waited. I didn't know the half of it. I stayed silent. He cleared his throat. Ellery, why didn't you ever tell us? I almost laughed. Almost. Because some things aren't whispered down hallways. They're lived. Fought. Earned. You never asked, I said. And then came the pause, that long, father-shaped pause that once commanded boardrooms and silenced children. But now it sounded like defeat. Like a man running out of narratives. Would you come by just once, he asked. Just for dinner? I thought about it. About the little girl who once sat at that table and waited for him to look up from his newspaper. About the teenager who wore a cadet uniform to her sister's wedding and got asked to take it off because it's too masculine. About the woman he took to court over property, not realizing she had once intercepted the threat that would have cost him everything. No, I said. Not cruel, not bitter, just honest. No, I'm not angry. I told him. But I'm not hungry either. The line went quiet. I ended the call. Sometimes silence is the best armor. The next week, I returned to base. Not for duty, for closure. I handed my resignation to command, my final exit papers, a clean departure. No drama, just facts. They offered to fast-track me to defense liaison, a higher title, better clearance, more medals. But I declined, because my mission had shifted. I no longer needed hierarchy to validate me. I was done protecting people who only wanted my silence. That afternoon, I sat in the chapel on base. Empty pews, faint dust in the sunlight, and I whispered, for the first time in years, a single prayer, not for forgiveness, for peace. You ever pray, not because you need help, but because you're finally done fighting? I left my gloves on the altar, a symbol of all the ways I'd carried weight that wasn't mine. Later that night, I burned the lawsuit papers. Every page, every stamp, every lie. Watched the ashes rise in the fire pit like feathers caught in wind. I didn't keep copies, because I didn't need proof anymore, only memory. And memory, when cleared of shame, becomes armor. I rented a small cabin upstate. No cell signal, just trees, just air, just time. That first morning, I stood by the lake and let the stillness break something open inside me, something that had been held shut since the academy, since the courtroom, since my name became a wound instead of a welcome. I took off the uniform, folded it carefully, placed it inside the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, not to forget, but to rest. Do you know what it's like to be strong for so long? You forget how to breathe. I learned again, day by day. No family visits, no calls. Just me, and the echo of what I used to think I needed. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name handwritten in blue ink. Inside, a photo. Me, standing in the courtroom. The agent saluting. And behind me, just barely in frame, my brother, eyes lowered, watching. On the back, a single sentence. I saw everything, and I'm sorry. It wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. I folded the photo, placed it next to my grandfather's picture. Two men, one from blood, one from war, both now quiet, and me finally whole. Not because they saw me, but because I stopped waiting for them to. The snow came early that year. It fell like silence, gentle, uninvited, but somehow appropriate, blanketing the past without asking for permission. I sat at the cabin window in a wool sweater. No medals, no boots, just a warm mug in my hand and a kind of stillness in my chest that I hadn't known in decades. I hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days, and for once, it didn't feel like exile. It felt like healing. You ever go so long trying to earn your place in a room that, when you're finally alone, it feels like freedom? There were no court dates, no military briefings, no birthday dinners where my name went unsaid. Just the soft crackle of the fire and a log shifting as it burned. I opened a notebook, the one I'd brought with me on my last deployment but never dared to fill. Too dangerous to write anything down then. Too dangerous to feel. But now, the ink flowed, not about combat, not about betrayal, just fragments of thought. Things like, there is no medal for surviving erasure. Sometimes a daughter has to become a soldier to be heard. Silence is not the absence of sound, it's the absence of welcome. That evening, I heard a knock at the door. Not hard, hesitant. Not the kind of knock from someone who believes they have the right to be there. I opened it to find my sister. She was bundled in a navy coat, cheeks red from wind, eyes uncertain. She'd driven hours the tire tracks still visible in the snow. She held nothing in her hands, just herself. She didn't speak right away. Neither did I. But then she said it. I didn't stand up for you. In court. Before that. Ever. I nodded. That's true. I told myself it wasn't my fight. She whispered. But that was a lie. I just didn't want to lose what little approval I had left. Her voice cracked. From them. She nodded. I opened the door wider. She stepped in. We didn't hug. That kind of intimacy doesn't grow back instantly, but we shared the space. And that was a beginning. I poured her tea. We sat at opposite ends of the hearth. No small talk. She stared at the uniform folded in the cedar chest. Do you miss it? Every day, I said. And yet, you left. I didn't leave the mission, I said. I just stopped mistaking my family for it. Her eyes welled up. I always wanted to be brave like you. You still can, I said. But not for them. The fire popped. A log split. And in that moment, the cabin was warmer than it had ever been. You ever realize that reconciliation doesn't come through apologies, but through sitting with the truth, side by side? Later, she left. No promises, no grand declarations. Just a hand on my arm as she stepped out. Something we hadn't shared since we were kids hiding under the covers during a storm. The next morning, I walked to the lake. The snow had stopped. The water was still, frozen, but glowing in the dawn. I thought about all the uniforms I'd worn in my life. Cadet, lieutenant, daughter, ghost, and now just woman. Whole, unquiet, remembered. A few days later, I received a formal letter from the Department of Defense. An invitation, not to return to service but to speak. A keynote at the academy, theme visibility, silence, and the women who serve. I stared at the envelope. They wanted me to return to the place where my name had once been left off the list. To speak on the stage where my father once told me, "Don't make a scene." To address cadets who, like me, were taught that excellence means nothing if you were born into the wrong story. I said yes, because some stories need a stage. 2 weeks later, I stepped into the auditorium. Rows of crisp uniforms, shined shoes, wide eyes. And at the back of the room, someone I didn't expect. My mother, seated alone. No smile, no tears, just presence. I stood at the podium in a dark navy suit. No decorations, no rank, just a voice. And I spoke. Not of war, not of betrayal, but of silence. What it costs, what it teaches, what it takes to break it. When I finished, the applause didn't come right away, because some truths leave echoes. But when it did come, it was real, sustained, standing. And my mother, she didn't clap. She stood. That was enough. I walked off the stage without turning back, because I no longer needed to see who followed. I only needed to walk forward. The next morning, I received a message from a cadet who'd been in the front row. He said, "Your story changed the way I see my sister. I didn't realize. She was fighting too." And that, more than anything, was the reversal I needed. Not a courtroom collapse, not a parent's apology, but a shift in someone else's sight. Because sometimes power is not about commanding rooms, it's about changing one pair of eyes at a time. And as for my parents, they never took me to court again. They never called me a fraud again, because the country had already called me something else. Commander, I didn't need them to respect me. The whole room already did.